Hey, my name is David Allen South, and we have Pastor Candy here. Say hello there, Candy.
Hello, everyone.
She is going to ask questions, make some statements. We're going to talk about the Father's Word, different aspects of the universe, and we're just welcoming you along on this journey. All right, Candy, you go ahead.
Go ahead. You go ahead.
All right. Well, we started out in one of our earlier sessions that didn't get recorded very well, showing the simplistic comparisons of alterations between the ancient text that's been called the Old Testament and the more contemporary texts of the first century that they call the New Testament. They called it the New Testament to make it appear as if the Old Testament was done away with. And there has been a lot of energy and documentation by different religious individuals down through the centuries trying to convince people that, oh, well, the Father's word in that first phase is done away with, and now we have a New Testament. I even have a perfect example. I was sitting in on a Bible study, and the guy said, I was like you. I was like you, and I wanted what I wanted, and I wanted it then. And he said, I'm not like that anymore. And he was discussing different aspects of, let's see, addiction. It was for people that had substance abuse issues and different things like that, and they were at a halfway house or whatever.
Uh-huh.
But then the first thing that came out of his mouth after his introduction was, that Old Testament is bad. It's bad for you, man. It puts a burden on you. But we have the New Testament. We have Jesus, and he gives us freedom. Well, the thing about that, and we'll just go to Messiah's words. Let's not take my word for it. Let's see what he said. Where would we find that? I believe in Matthew chapter 5 would be a good place to start. Let's see, Matthew chapter 5. And I believe this is where the Beatitudes are. It certainly is. How we're taught to be meek. We are taught to be humble. We are taught to bring peace, to have a pure heart. And it even says that those of us, maybe, that try to serve, if we are persecuted, the Father tries to share with us confidence and say, don't be dismayed because of it. All right. So we get down, and here it is, Matthew chapter 5, verse 15, 16, and 17. Let's just go to 17 and cut off that first part. Think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. The word law there is the Torah, which is where we get the Ten Commandments and some of the other issues. It says that he didn't come to destroy the law or the promises with the prophets that had documented them. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill.
Yeah.
He says, verily I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, not one jot, not one tittle shall in no wise pass from the Torah till all be fulfilled. Now, the word I believe there in the first century was Tanakh, or the reference to the entire aspect of all of the Father's promises. But here they use the word law, and I don't think I have the ability to check the Greek to see, because I'm not sure if they have a specific word for Torah. I shouldn't be that lazy. I'll have to look that up in the future. But anyway, he literally says that not heaven or earth will pass away, and yet Torah will still be the standard. This is him right there. But here's the next thing that he says. Whosoever therefore shall break one of the least of the commandments and teach others to do so, they shall be considered the least valued in the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever will honor the commandments and teach them, the same shall be considered the greatest aspect of, because we know that it is the Father that does good through us. We of ourselves cannot do anything good, but the Father gives us opportunity, and if he gives us the energy and the inclination, and then of course his power comes through and works through us to make things happen. So here we have the Messiah himself saying that not one aspect of any of the promises the Father gave us down through time will be diminished, even until heaven and earth pass away. In other words, the Father's promises are eternal. But for some reason, people don't seem to get that message when they're sitting in the pews at church. I mean, they say it in ways, I think. They try and say, oh, well, it's more of, oh, you'll have bliss on earth and eternal happiness in heaven. So, as far as that goes,
You have to do your part.
excellent. That's very true. I was thinking, just to show another difference, is if we go to Joel chapter 2, oops, push the wrong button, sorry. Just to show, because we covered this that first time, but it didn't get recorded. And Joel 2:28, and then Acts chapter 2, and just quickly to show how, because I'm going to ask you a question because I don't want to tell you what to think, but I'm under the impression that Shimon Kefa, the one called Simon Peter, after being trained personally by the Messiah, I'm under the impression that he was going to quote the scriptures verbatim because the Messiah did. Because the Messiah made certain that he gave the word in its entirety. And so, if in fact he would have quoted Joel, then we would go back to Joel and see that it was quoted verbatim. So now we'll go to Joel, and this is the standard that we know, because this tells us not only what's going to happen right before Messiah returns, but it also tells us certain aspects of how the Father will be working through us, just as he did in the first century through the Messiah, and then subsequently through his followers. And then it also gives us the Father's name. The very name, the name above all names, gives us the name that we are to call upon. The name that Peter, James, and John were beaten for using. They were forbidden to use it, and they were put in jail. So anyway, it says, and you shall know that.
No.
What's that?
No.
Joel 2:28.
Okay.
Did you want to read it, or did you want me to read it?
I read it.
Great.
And it shall come to pass afterwards that I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your old men shall dream dreams. Your young men shall see visions. And also on my men servants and on my maid servants I will pour out my spirit in those days. And I will show wonders in the heavens and the earth, blood and fire and pillars of smoke. The sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the coming of the great and awesome day of the Lord. Okay?
And then 32, the final verse.
And it shall come to pass that whoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. For in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem there shall be deliverance, as the Lord has said, among the remnant whom the Lord called.
Well, there you go. There's a promise right there as well. Now, when it says the Lord, anywhere in what is called the Old Testament or the New Testament, if it is a capital L-O-R-D, then it actually stands for the Tetragrammaton, as you know, which is in the Strong's numbers, it's H3068, and it stands for the name Yahuwah, the Yud He Vav He, and it's over, I believe, 6,280 times just in what is called the Old Testament. We don't know how many times it was utilized in the first century writings because it was completely hacked out of the versions that we have of the copies after the first century. There were some that were copied properly, and you could even see that when they put the Father's name in, they did it in the old Paleo Hebrew, and this goes down even into, I believe, some of the Greek copies, some of the earliest Greek copies of the first century writings. I have copies of those in my computer somewhere. If I'm smart enough, I'll post them on this video. All right, so the good news there is that the Father gives us the name, He tells us things. Well, there are certain aspects that we know of those that happened in the first century when the city and the temple were destroyed in 70 of the Common Era, but it also talks about in our generation before the great and terrible day. That means basically what in our vernacular is called the tribulation.
The temple will be rebuilt.
Now Ezekiel discusses a temple. That is correct. Now it also talks about he will show wonders in the heavens, in the earth. Then there's blood and fire, pillars of smoke. The sun shall be turned into darkness, and the moon into blood before the great and terrible day of Yahweh. All right. Well, we know that on some of the holy days within the last couple of years, we had the blood moons. We do know that with nuclear testing and nuclear uh, armament, that they make pillars of fire, they make columns of smoke, and we know that those combined with the pollution in the atmosphere, there are some cities that the light has diminished far more than 10%, and in some cities, the pollution is so bad that it obscures the sunlight and diminishes more than 30% of the actual photons trying to get through. So there is the similitude of us being able to say, well, it appears right here that we can see not only in time, but even in our generation, aspects of this coming through. And this was written, I dare to say, a couple hundred years before the Messiah was born. I'm thinking easily. And then now I'm going to jump. I'm going to jump to Acts chapter 2, and we'll read the translated version. I believe it starts around verse 19. I'm not sure. I should know, but I'm cheating. Oh, it starts. It starts a little bit before number 19. Yeah, it starts right around 2:15, 2:16.
Are you there?
Oh yeah, I figured you might want to read it. If you don't, I will.
No, I'm trying to get there.
Oh, okay, no problem. It says, "But this is that which was spoken by the prophet Joel. It shall come to pass in the last days, says Yah, that I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, your young men shall see visions, your old men shall dream dreams. And on my servants and on my handmaidens I will pour out in those days of my spirit, and they shall prophesy. And I will show wonders in heaven above, and signs in the earth beneath, blood and fire, vapor of smoke. The sun shall be turned into darkness, and the moon into blood, before that great and notable day of Yah. And whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved." All right. It's not that much different. What's that?
Confirmation.
Yeah.
Confirmation.
Yep. It covers all the basic points, just some of the phraseology has changed. And we also see that the name of the Father has been removed and the Lord has been placed there as well. But they did that for us in the Old Testament because, again, we have the translations, not the transliterations. Because when you look at the Hebrew versions, they never change the name. What people don't understand why the Old Testament is so valuable, because of all of the mistakes that the Hebrews made, one of the things that they did right was they had experts make certain that they took it one character letter at a time. And they made certain after writing the passages that an expert secondary and then an expert tertiary would then recheck to make sure it's verbatim, one character at a time, everything the same. Because they were not to change even the letters themselves early on. They weren't even supposed to change the slightest serif of the smallest letter. Now, I'm not sure if that was Talmud, but I didn't find that in the Bible, so I can only say that that's what I heard. But it does say, as we know, do not try to get around Torah to the right or the left, and do not change one iota or whatever. I'm sorry, iota is Greek. So,
one word.
Yeah, yes, we're not to change any of it so that the message will remain the same. Because if the message starts to change, then it's up to the discretion of each individual generation to then say, oh, well, I would say it this way and I would say it that way. And then it gets to where we played this game when we were in school. They called it telephone.
Yeah.
And the teacher would tell the first kid, and then they would tell the next kid all the way through to the end. Oh, and that one of the movies that was made by DreamWorks with the animals that escaped the zoo to go back to Africa. They even made a reference of that, I think, in their second movie. And they showed how by the time it gets to the end of the line, the message is maybe humorous, but it's not the same at all. And but the thing is, and what I show in my research is when the proto-Catholic Roman Empire slaughtered all of the original followers of the Hebrew Messiah, after slaughtering the Hebrew Messiah at the behest of the religious leadership, when they slaughtered the followers of the followers and the Gentile converts, they gathered up the writings and then they rewrote them in committees over several decades. And I can cover this here in a little bit. But one of the reasons that it happened that way is, again, going back to the garden, starting from the very beginning. Grandmother and grandfather, Adam and Eve, what we see is that the Father went to them and he gave them his instructions. He said, everything is yours. It's all free. That's my personal stash. You leave that alone. If you mess with that, it will bring death. Well, the Father set us up. He brought in the adversary and allowed that to knock us down. That way we're all under sin. That way we can all be under the umbrella of salvation. The plan of redemption, salvation, reconciliation, teaching us eternal lessons in this finite timeline. And in the garden, when the adversary conned us into eating the fruit, what happened? Exactly what the Father said. Entropy took over. Our body started to deteriorate. They eventually died. Disease and sin entered in. But then again, we had to learn that when the Father told us something, we can trust it. And it isn't just good for us and not good for other people. When the Father makes a rule, it's good for everybody. That's something people don't understand, and I don't believe that they're taught that, again, when they're sitting in the pews. Because the Father allows so many horrible things to happen, uh, we can tend to sometimes think that he's a mean old bully, when in fact he's just teaching us that fire is hot. You know, don't stick your tongue in a light socket. So, what happened after they ate the fruit and after the Father explained their new situation? They got kicked out of the garden, didn't they? Okay, so let's go down a little bit. We have grandfather Noah, and he had his kids and the ark and gathering the animals, going through the situation, the transition. And then they come out on Ararat and they allow the people that are there and the animals to then fill the earth. Now, when we get to great uncle Nimrod, we see that he kind of had issues with some of the things that the Father instructed them. So he started to break the Father's rules by creating initiatives and inviting people. Instead of filling the earth, he says, we'll build cities and we'll make ourselves a place here. Now, again, there's nothing wrong with setting up and establishing. But when the Father says fill the earth, he means fill the earth. Again, though, setting us up for a specific situation. When they would not disperse, because again, there's safety in numbers. If everybody works together, there's not as much work for the individual. On one hand, it was really a great idea to pool their resources. But this is where the Father gives us the separation by the languages. In giving us the separation of languages, evidently there was also intuitive aspects that were differentiated also. Because at that time we see that the Father says Well, here we see that they are all working together. And if we do not do something to separate them at this point, they might be able to reach the stars. Uh, and as we know, people were not cave dwellers that were absolutely stupid, ignorant, grunting individuals, because we have found technology thousands upon thousands of years old that is, even in one of the pyramids, they say that they found an alloy that was thousands of times more resilient than any of the alloys that we have right now. And they found it in a pyramid that's supposed to have been closed for maybe 5,000 years. So clearly, when in Ararat, at the foot of Ararat, when they found parts of the ark, they found metal brads and studs, and another word for them are rivets. How certain things were put together, and they took them and had them analyzed at the Galbraith Castle, not Castle, sorry. Our ancestors used to live at Galbraith Castle in Scotland, but Galbraith Laboratories in Tennessee. Knoxville, Tennessee is where Galbraith, and there's even a city, Galbraith, 30 miles from where my mom lived, and right now where she's buried. She didn't even know. She lived there for 30 some odd years, didn't even know a town named after her family was just within driving distance. That's neither here nor there. But they analyzed some of the wood, and they analyzed some of the rivets, and they said that I believe that there was a mixture of iron, a little bit of titanium. I think they said that there was like some sulfur, a mineral, uh, and yet within the wood that was already easily tested to be incredibly old, it was showing that ancient folk had really excellent skills in metallurgy that we have not even attained yet with all of modern science, and we've gone into orbit, literally sent probes out into space. Uh, so the father saying that, if we do not separate them, they may be able to reach the stars might have been a valid statement and not a misquote.
Mm-hmm.
But so then what do we see? We see that they didn't do what the father asked, and so what did he do? He kicked them out. He changed their languages and he dispersed them. That's example number 2. The father gives instructions, the people didn't obey, and the father made an adjustment and kicked them out. Grandma and grandpa in the garden, the folks at Babel. Now we go to grandfather and or uncle or cousin, depending on our bloodline, Abraham. The father makes a deal with grandfather Abraham, and he says, hey, if you'll be my friend and if you'll trust me and do things my way, I will make a promise to you. And in that promise, all of the nations of the earth will be blessed. Oh boy, how would I find that? I would go like this, I think. Nations blessed. Let's see if this works.
Okay.
It says, seeing Abraham surely become great and mighty nation, and all of the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. Genesis 18:18. That is just a quote. And the first one that came up, but I'm not certain. That's not the actual original promise. I believe this is people talking. Oh, wow. Yeah, this is actually where he's telling, this is where the father actually came to meet him on the plains before Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed. This is before he and Lot split up. And so this is right when the father's about to say it. He says, and the father said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I of a surety bear a child when I am old? Is anything too hard for Yahuwah? At the time appointed, I will return to you according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son. Well, here we have the very situation. And then the father promises that son, and in Abraham, of course, all of the nations will be blessed through that seed. Now that goes back again to the promise in the garden with Grandpa and Grandma Adam and Eve. The Father spoke to the minion, whatever the serpent was, and made a promise. Now, something about the bruised heel and a bruised forehead, and something about one of the seed of the woman. So, to me, that's like a messianic promise, and we see that it's going to be an authoritative issue for the future. But that's just how I see it in retrospect by how I comprehend the scriptures.
Uh-huh.
So then, when we have Abraham being given the promise, the promise of having a son in his old age. He and his wife are beyond the normal years of having children. So clearly, either a miracle or at least something out of the ordinary, or as some say, supernatural. And then the promise of all the nations will be blessed through his seed. I believe I have to accept the fact that that again is more of promise to the Messiah himself, because it's the Messiah living the perfect life, being the willing, pure sacrifice, giving us the ability for redemption, reconciliation to the Father above, and giving the ability for us to go and spend eternity with them.
Yeah.
So let's see, where would we go from here? So then we have that promise there. Okay, since we're on messianic promises, let's go to Uncle Moshe, Uncle Moses. Let's go to Deuteronomy 18.
Okay.
Now,
18.
if the Father in this chapter goes through certain aspects again of what the congregation of Israel is allowed to do and what they are not allowed to do. He talks about people that are wizards, people that are necromancers, people that do incantations, people that are Wiccan or witches, people that are into occult of all different manners are literally delineated in different aspects, and we are forbidden to have anything to do with that. It also says that we're not allowed to run people through the fire. In other words, certain aspects of occultic activities are not supposed to be participated in. That's interesting. But in avoiding all of these other aspects, because we're different and we go to the Father gives us the ability and shows that He is, in fact, the true deity, the true creator of the universe. So if we start, in 1810, here in 18:9, when you are come into the land which Yahuwah, your mighty one, gives you, you shall not learn to do after the abominations of those nations, all of those that do not respect the Father above. It says, there shall not be found among you anyone that makes his son or his daughter to pass through the fire, or that uses divination, that's divining, looking for dark spirits to give you information you cannot grasp, or an observer of times, that is considered astrology, or an enchanter, that is someone who uses incantations and magic potions, or a witch, that's a person who reaches, of course, to the dark side, or a charmer, or a consulter with familiar spirits. Nowadays, they call them ascended masters, but it's just the same thing. Or a wizard, a necromancer. For all these that do these things are an abomination to Yahuwah. And because of these abominations, Yah, your mighty one, is going to drive them out from before you. Now here comes the declaration of our own standard. You shall be perfect with Yahuwah, your mighty one. For these nations which you shall possess, hearken unto observers of times, diviners, but for you, Yahuwah, your mighty one, has not given you permission to do so. For your mighty one will raise up unto you a prophet from the midst of you, of your brethren, like unto me. Unto him shall ye hearken. According to all that you desired of Yahuwah, your mighty one, in this mountain, in this day of assembly, saying, let me not hear again the voice of Yahuwah, my mighty one, neither let me see this great fire anymore, because I'm afraid it will kill me. So the Father said, they have well spoken that which they have said. I will raise up unto them a prophet from among their brothers, just exactly like you, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak unto them all that I shall command him. And it shall come to pass that whosoever will not hearken unto my words, which he will speak in my name, I will require it of them. So here we see again, the Father discusses Messiah. He discusses Messiah as an individual. He discusses Messiah as speaking only his words, which he puts in Messiah's mouth. And it says then that will be held responsible for those words. Now we're beginning to see again, the Father gives instructions. Now, this is literally at the foot of the mountain that the Father just gave the commandments, and they're shuddering in fear. And so the Father gives them a response, again, using it as an opportunity to tell us about something that Messiah would do. Now, what do we know about Uncle Moshe? He said he will be a prophet like unto yourselves. Well, we know that he is specifically guided, trained, taught, motivated, and empowered by the Father above. We know that he specifically spent time with the Father, came down with the Father's words, and shared it with the people. We know then, later on, from leaving the mountain and going, that he guided the people with by the Father's instructions, that he led them in battle, that he protected them by the Father's inclination and inspiration, but it was the Father that did the ultimate protection. So then, he literally brought them to the promised land, but only got to the outskirts of it. Who was the one that led them into the land? Yahusha, same name as the Messiah, took the mantle of Uncle Moshe, and then he was led by the Father. He was empowered by the Father. He protected them, led them into the land, was their warrior leader, was their spiritual example. Then he established their places in the promised land after bringing them to the promised land, and then established the priesthood, established the places for the tabernacle, made certain that establishment for the altar, and then, until he died, basically stood again as a judge and an example. So Yahusha himself was a typification, just as Isaac, the promised son, came at a time when it seemed impossible. Since let's not forget, Egypt itself would never have been an empire if it wasn't for Joseph, the great great grandson of grandfather Abraham. I completely messed that one up. He literally was possibly number one under King Dozier in Egypt, and they found the big giant bins where the grain was stored, and they found, I don't know, however old grains still at the bottoms of the bins. And I hope they took samples and saved them, and I hope that they started growing them, because those would be far more genetically perfect than the GMOs that we're dealing with nowadays. If we could just get 5 grains and generate live plants, we could then have a harvest of very healthy plants. And not only
prevent famine.
Yeah, and yes, and they are reminiscent of the years of plenty. So then, if we want to follow the messianic thing, I really should spend more time on Joseph, but the fact was he was second unto Dozier, and yet by the time Uncle Moshe is there, they were already diminished, demeaned, and reduced to being slaves by the very people that the father made wealthy. All right, so then how would we find? Do you remember the verse in Isaiah? Uh, the government will be upon his shoulder. Shoulder.
I don't know where.
It's in Isaiah, so I'll cheat and I'll just go like this. Isaiah through Daniel. I just look up the word shoulder. It says, "For thou hast broken the yoke." Okay. Here we go. Here it is. Isaiah 9. All right. Yeshua, a very blessed prophet. He was, according to tradition, cut in half, even though he gave us so many specific prophecies about the Messiah. But people hear this. This is about that time of year. I mean, we're coming up on Christmas pretty soon. I'm sorry. We just passed the Halloween holiday, and then we got to Thanksgiving coming up on the day of Thor this next week. It's usually the Thursday after my birthday, unless it's 2 or 3 days, then it has to be a week afterwards, because traditionally it's on the day of Thor's Day. But this might sound familiar. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Anyway, it says, of the increase of his government and the peace, there shall be no end. Upon the throne of David, that's where we get the promise of being on the throne of David, and upon his kingdom, to order it and to establish it with judgment and with justice from henceforth and even until the end of time. The zeal of Yahuwah will perform this. Wow. Yahuwah has sent a word unto Jacob, and it has lit upon Israel. And all the people shall know, even Ephraim, and the inhabitant of Samaria, that shall say in the pride of the stoutness of heart, the bricks are fallen down, but we will build with hewn stones. The sycamores are cut down, but we will change them into cedars. Therefore the Yahuwah shall set up the adversaries of Rezin against him, and join his enemies together. Okay, now it's going to talk about the Syrians, the Philistines. It's talking about evidently what's going to come up in the future. Man, you can't read in Isaiah without seeing the future. But let's just stick with the Messiah's thing. Okay, so now we see certain aspects, but then 53, is it? Isaiah 53. 53. There it is. Who has believed? Have you got Isaiah 53?
No, I'm taking notes.
Oh, very good. But it will be on the video, but that's okay. Go ahead and take all the notes you like. It says, who has believed our report? And to whom is the arm of Yahuwah revealed? For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, as a root out of the dry ground. He has no form nor comeliness, and when we shall see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. He is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, and we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. We hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of Yah, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes, we are healed. All we, like sheep, have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and Yahuwah has laid upon him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed, he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He is brought as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before her shearers is dumb, so he did not open his mouth. He was taken from prison and from judgment. And who shall declare his generation? For he was cut off out of the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was stricken. And he made his grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, because he had done no violence, neither was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it pleased Yahuwah to bruise him. He has put him to grief. When you shall make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed, he shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of Yahuwah shall prosper in his hand. He shall see of the travail of his soul, and shall be satisfied. By his knowledge shall my righteous servant justify many, for he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore will I divide him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he has poured out his soul unto death. And he was numbered with the transgressors, and he bare the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors. Joy, do you need to go outside? My puppy may be having issues.
Okay.
So literally what we see is somebody that's being punished, and he's being punished for the sins of Israel.
And our sin.
Well, did you know that the Orthodox rabbis took this entire chapter out of the reading? They have the reading of the Old Testament every year, and they only took out 2 chapters. We're about to go to the other chapter that they took out, and this is why. That literally, every time a Hebrew was able to literally read that chapter, almost every single one of them came to the conclusion that it was talking about an Israeli who suffered and had to realize that the Messiah of the first century fulfilled many of these specific criteria. So now I'm going to Daniel chapter 9. And we are literally going to see Messiah being discussed and even deemed by the term Messiah. It's starting in Daniel 9. Well, you read it, remember? Shoot, when we started from you started from the very beginning, and it talked about how Daniel prayed and fasted for 21 days. And the list of some of the data points were that we, Israel, got kicked out of the land because we, Israel, sinned, because we, Israel, turned away from your statutes, from your promises, from your commandments, and from your instructions. I may have used that word already. And it says, and so now we are to confess our sin because we got kicked out of the land as you had promised. So then we come to where the angel arrives to actually bring the message and interrupts him in his prayer. And so then we'll get to Daniel is praying. Let's just start. Okay, in verse 16. You don't have to read along. I'll read it if you need to take any notes or whatever. You're welcome to read along. It's great. It says, "Oh yeah, according to." Hey, did you want to read it?
Okay. Oh Lord, according to all your righteousness, I pray. Let your anger and your fury be turned away from your city, Jerusalem, your holy mountain, because for our sins and for the iniquities of our fathers, Jerusalem and your people are a reproach to all those around us. Now, therefore, our God, hear the prayer of your servant and his supplications, and for the Lord's sake, does your face cause your face to face? Oh gosh, cause your face to shine on your sanctuary, which is desolate. Oh my God, incline your ear and hear. Open your eyes and see our desolations in the city which is called by your name. For we do not present our supplications before you because of our righteous deeds, but because of your great mercy. O Lord, hear, O Lord, forgive, O Lord, listen and act. Do not delay for your own sake, my God, for your city and your people are called by your name.
Yeah, it says, and while I was speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people, Israel, and presenting my supplication before Yahuwah, my mighty one, for the very holy mountain of Yah, yet while I was speaking, while I was in the midst of praying, even the individual Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision at the beginning, discussing chapter 2, and he talked with me and said, "O Daniel, I am now come forth to give you skill and understanding. At the beginning of your supplications, the commandment came forth, and I am come to show you, for you are greatly beloved. Therefore, understand the matter and consider the vision. 70 weeks are determined upon your people, upon your holy city, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecies, and finally to anoint the most holy. Know, therefore, and understand that going from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks of years. The street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublous times. And after 62 weeks of years shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. Remember, just like what we read in Isaiah. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be like a flood. Unto the end of the war, desolations are determined. And this is what happened when Titus, the prince, the son of Vespasian, the emperor of Rome, came in and destroyed the city in 70 of the Common Era. Completely destroyed the city, the walls, the temple itself, the sanctuary was knocked down. And just like the Messiah said, and I think Matthew 24 or Luke 21, wherever it was that he said it, that not one stone of the temple was left on top of another one. And some of the stones are still knocked over and in a pile. They were there at least when I was in 2002, 2001 to 2002. So what we see is a formula. Now, when it says that 62 weeks the street shall be built again, and the wall even in troublous times, it's talking about his generation. It's talking about when Nehemiah, Nehemiah, I think that's how you guys call him, and Ezra went back to the city to survey it, and then to rebuild the wall, and they started to build the temple. And then when we went to Ezra, remember you read the revival thing in Ezra. Do you remember what chapter that was? Let's see. I think that was Ezra 9. I don't remember. I'll have to cheat. I don't think I can cheat. I don't even know where to find Ezra. Oh, near the front. There it is. Ezra and Nehemiah. That's what it is. Is it? Well, the scriptures that they brought up were in Ezra 9. So I guess that's why I said that. Okay. Now, when these things were done, the princes came to me, saying, the people of Israel and the priests and the Levites have not separated themselves from the people of the lands, doing according to their abominations, even the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Pezerites, the Jebusites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Egyptians, the Amors. Basically, again, they went back and they found that the people could not read Hebrew. They could not read their own writings. So they didn't have revival. They didn't have a relationship with the Father. And they basically did what the pagans did. And so they were living amongst the pagans. They were marrying the pagans. They were living in the pagans' way of life. And so they had to then go through a process of separation, separating the pagan aspects, telling anyone, I believe what they're supposed to do is say any of the pagans that are not disqualified have the right to stay. But because there were only a few families that they were forbidden to join, and the Father gave his reason, and that was when we came back. Well, when we came back from Egypt, yes, they did not treat us well. But the thing about Ezra is when they went back, they enjoyed him reading the Exodus, reading Genesis, getting them refamiliarized with the scriptures. And then, for the first time in I don't know how many generations, they were actually celebrating tabernacles. And the Father blessed them. And they repented, made some alterations, and then we see that good things happened. That was the time when both Ezra had come back and was there, Nehemiah was there, Daniel showed up, and even Yahusha, the high priest, was there. I don't remember which book it is. I believe that's the one in Nehemiah where he literally discussed the entire description of who was there, who was representing the folk of each tribe, how that they had built the city, the wall, how they had gotten together and celebrated, and also the aspect of separating the occult and the pagan from the from the population. And then reading the Torah, realigning them, in showing what the Father did to them to take them from being slaves to being free and having their own land, realigning again, showing that they have a lot to be thankful for, and moving into the aspect of getting back to part of the commandments and obeying, and then that's where they enjoyed tabernacles. They got to camp with the Father and barbecue, and while I'm talking, I was trying to remember. I was trying to remember the scriptures that I wanted to leap to. Oh, right, it's in Zechariah, chapter 3, because Zechariah was the high priest of that time, and he was there during that specific revival. And in chapter 3 of Zechariah, it's spelled Z-E-C, even though I say it like it has an A. Sorry. It says, and he showed to me Joshua, the high priest, standing before the angel of Yah, and Satan standing at his right hand to resist him. And Yah said unto Shaitan, Yahuwah, I rebuke you, O Shaitan, even I myself, Yahuwah, that have chosen Jerusalem. I rebuke you. And then he says, is this not the brand plucked out of the fire? Now Joshua was clothed with filthy garments and stood before the angel. I believe this is a vision. It says, now Joshua was clothed with the filthy garments, stood before the angel. And he answered and spake unto those who stood before him, saying, take away the filthy garments. He said, behold, I have caused your iniquity to pass from you. I will clothe you with a change of raiment. And I said, let them set a fair mitre upon his head. So they set a fair mitre upon his head. They clothed him with garments, and the angel, the messenger of Yahuwah, stood by. And the messenger of Yah protested to Joshua, saying, Thus says the Almighty One, Yahuwah of hosts, if you will walk in his ways, or in my ways, because it's his direct quote, and if you will keep my charge, if you will also judge my house and will also keep my courts, and I will give you places to walk among these that stand by. Hear now, O Joshua, Yahusha, the same name as the first century prophet, high priest, you and your fellows that sit before you, for they are men wondered at. For behold, I will bring forth my servant, the branch, messianic term right there. For behold, the stone that I have laid before Joshua. That is a reference to Daniel chapter 2. Upon one stone shall be seven eyes. That's a reference to Revelation. Behold, I will engrave the engraving thereof, says Yahuwah of the hosts. I will remove the iniquity of that land in one day, talking about the execution of Messiah. And in that day, says Yahuwah of hosts, shall you call every man his neighbor under the vine and under the fig tree. What did they do after the Messiah was executed and risen? He sent them back out and made certain that he was to remind them to gather together again as Israel, to seek the Father. The promises have been fulfilled, and that they are to get back to the very journey that they were commanded to do when they were sitting at the foot of Horeb, when the Father gave his commandments and they shuddered and said, we are afraid of this person. We cannot let him talk to us. Going full circle. So, again, I may have to cut this a little short. My puppy is freaking. But
Okay, go ahead.
but nonetheless, we see that there's a challenge here in Zechariah for the high priest that he will be set above all peers if he will do everything that the Father commands. And we see that the same challenge was given to the Messiah. And when the Father came and said, this is my Son in whom I am well pleased, hear ye him. That was a reiteration of what we just read, of course, in Deuteronomy chapter 18. Listen to him. I will put my words in his mouth. You will listen and you will be held accountable. And so here he is again, the reiteration of again. And the branch. The Father is the tree. The branch is the Messiah. We are the nodes, the nodules. We are the fruit. And we entice the world to come and take part of the tree. It is how I'm seeing this particular analogy. And in that, how can I tie that in? Joy, do you want
to? Okay.
Let's see. Where would I find that? Oh, that's an easy one.
You know what I'm thinking? What you just said. The tree's pruned too.
The tree that was pruned was the one that those that bear fruit shall be pruned so that they can bear more fruit. Is that the one you're referring to?
Yeah.
Doggone it. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, right. Here we go. I go here. Stop that. Just a minute, baby. Okay, so I'm going to the New Testament. Well pleased. This is my Son. Here we go. And lo, they heard a voice from heaven saying, this is my Son in whom I am well pleased. Behold, my servant, who I have chosen, my beloved, in whom my soul is well pleased. I will fill him with my spirit, and he will show judgment to the Gentiles. See, there it is again, the same challenge, but this time he's allowed to share that judgment with the Gentiles. Remember the promise to grandfather Abraham? In your seed, all shall be blessed. Goes all the way back to grandfather Noah, all the way back to grandfather Adam. The
nation, yes.
And one of the commandments that we as Hebrews have is wearing tzitzit. And the tzitzit is a bunch of fringes. It's all white fringes, but there's one thread that goes up into the knot and all the way back down. And so in that one blue thread, I believe that shows, because the query was, who has gone up into heaven? Who has brought down the message from the Father? Who has come down from the Father above to declare who he is? Well, only one, the Messiah. And I think that that is that one blue thread. Again, I'm just saying that I think. I'm not saying that I can prove this. I'm just saying that I literally see that the Father, to me at least, shows so many different aspects where he's trying to drive home. And oh, oh, right. And so then, if we go there, and then one last
drive home, being obedient and learning about Him. Yeah.
Yes, getting that relationship, going to the Father when you want to know something. He has it, He wants to share it. We don't need to go to demons. We don't need to go to familiar spirits. We don't need to go to witches. We don't need to go to the Witch of Endor, which is, remember how Endora, the name of the lady from that Bewitched TV show? Endora, the Witch of Endor. Just kind of, in a way, rubbing it in our faces or being humorous. Because again, when I was raised, we were taught that we evolved, so it was all fables anyway. So it was just a reference as far as they might have been concerned. But then in Daniel chapter 9, just to drive home, Joy, just a minute, please. What did I say? John chapter 9. Chapters 9 through 15 is the healing of the blind man, because what we're doing is we're doing messianic references. And so, just so that I could have this one segment, oh wow, okay, it's been an hour. Joy, if you can handle 10 more minutes, baby, I'll take you out, all right? Okay, so basically, and when Messiah passed by, he saw a man which was blind from his birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Master, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Here's a reference that I'll throw in real quick. The Father hardened Pharaoh's heart so that the Father could show his power. Now here we have this again. Who sinned? This man, his parents, that he was born blind? Messiah said, neither has this man sinned, nor his parents, but that the works of the Almighty ever-present Yahuwah may be made manifest in him. Because again, this is a messianic miracle to separate him from the average, everyday, run-of-the-mill prophet. I must work the works of him that sent me, while it is day. The night comes where no man can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. And when he had done that, spit on the ground, he made the clay. With the spit, he anointed the eyes of the blind man, and he said, go wash in the pool of Siloam. By interpreted, mean being sent. You see, it's laying out that whole thing. I only do what the one who sent me. So it's so poetic. The neighbors, therefore, which were there, that had seen him, questioned it. And as we know, just to go through it, and for the next several chapters, they go through an investigative process. The rabbis literally ask the man, they ask his friends, they ask his neighbors, they ask his parents, and then they come back and then they ask the man and harass him again. And then we come to this. They say, we do not believe you. We say you're a man altogether in sin. Because he said, he says that we know ever since Moses, there's never been a man that's been unrighteous that the Father has shown his power through. And clearly, this is the power of the Almighty. And so they get really messy with him. And then they say, we know that God spoke through Moshe. As far as this fellow, we do not know from where he has come from. And the man answered in a very clip. He said, wow, this is a marvelous thing that, you don't even know where he comes from. Yet this man has, by the power of the Almighty, opened my eyes. And we know that the Father does not hear sinners. But if any man be a worshiper of the Almighty and does his will, that man gets his prayers heard. If this man were not of Yah, he could do nothing. It says, they answered him and said, you were altogether born in sins, and you dare to teach us. And so then the Messiah, after that melee, the Messiah comes up and reiterates the individual, and he passes on the peace and the love, and he just says, go and be a good be a good example. But then there's the argument with the argument of his being Messiah. So they go back and they get up in Messiah's face and they say, well, again, tell us. And he says, I have. And we just passed that part there. And when we get into John 14 is so amazing because this is where the Father says, let not your heart be troubled. You believe in the Almighty ever-present Yahuwah. Believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you, because I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there ye may be also. And where I go, you know the way. This is where Thomas expressed it. He says, we don't know where you're going, and how can we know the way? He said, well, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except through me. If you had known me, you would have known my Father also. And from henceforth you know him and have seen him. And he says, Philip then says, show us the Father, and it will make us happy, or it is sufficient. He said, have I been so long with you, and yet you have not known me, Philip? And this is where some people think that the Messiah is the Father. Now, we know that he is 100% the Father's pure essence, whereas we are the Father's breath. It says, have I been with you so long? It says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And then you say, well, how can you show me the Father? But believe that I am in the Father, that the Father is in me. The words that I speak to you. They don't come from myself, but it is the Father that dwells in me. It is the Father that does the works. Believe me that I am in the Father is in me, or else believe me for the very work's sake. Because again, the Father made promises that the specific Messiah would do specific things to show that the Father's promises are valid. So again, scientific-based, fact-based faith. Now, did we hear of a third-party entity, a disembodied spirit? No. Only the Father, only the Son. There is not a secondary, tertiary Holy Spirit. We say, okay, verily I say to you, because he says, I am in the Father is in me, it is the Father that does the works through me. So when the Father says, I will send my Spirit, what he means is I will send my power via the spirit realm. I will spiritually do what I am to do, like he did down through the ages in the Old Testament. Nothing has changed except no longer are we murdering innocent, unwilling animals. Then it says, if you love me, keep my commandments, and I will pray the Father, and he shall give you comfort, that he may abide with you forever. Even the Spirit which brings truth, whom the world cannot receive because it cannot see him, neither know him. But you know him, for he dwells with you and shall be in you. The Spirit of truth. Okay. I do not and will not leave you comfortless. I will come to you. This is a promise. Yet in a little while the world will not see me, then they will see me. And in that day you shall know that I am in my Father, and you in me, and I in you. He that has the commandments and keeps them, it is he that loves me. In other words, if we don't love the Father, if we don't love the Messiah, we will not keep his commandments. And he that loves me shall be loved of my Father. I will love him and will manifest myself to him. All right, and then it says, if a man love me, he will keep my words. And my Father will love him, and we will come unto him and make our abode with him. So, he that loves me not does not keep my sayings, and the word which he hears is not mine. So we see that over and over again, it is the Father, it is the Messiah, it is the Father who does the works. It is the Messiah who is the door. It is the Messiah who is the willing sacrifice. It is the Messiah who gives us the ability to pass through the torn veil, no longer keeping us from the Holy of Holies. We see that the Messiah is valid, that Yahusha is the only possible candidate because he was born at the right time. We saw the formula in Daniel chapter 9. In Micah chapter 5, we see that he is to be born in Bethlehem Ephratah, which is just a couple miles from Tico. I've been to Tico, and Bruce Brill showed me. He says right over there, that hill, that mountain, over there is Bethlehem Ephratah. And so then because the Messiah was executed not for himself. We see in we see in John through the entire book, and Matthew, Mark, and Luke, that he was examined by the priests. He was examined by the authorities, and he was found, even by Pilate, to be guiltless. We see that even in John chapter 9, 10, and 11, where he healed the blind man, clearly a miracle has been performed here. They admitted it was that it was a messianic situation. So we see that he's the only candidate for the Messiah. We see that he calls people to obey the commandments. We see that he says that the commandments are life. They don't give us eternal life. We see that they promote life, because if you're obeying the commandments, you're not living in filth. You're not spreading disease.
Right.
You're not causing harm and death, which cause disease and pestilence. We see that the Father gave us promises, and because of the Septuagint, because of Daniel chapter 9, with this formula, we know that because of Daniel chapter 8, we have the Septuagint. When Alexander the Great conquered Darius the Mede, as predicted in Daniel chapter 8, we see that in book 11, chapter 8, paragraphs 4 through 6 of the writings of Josephus, the book of the Antiquities of the Jews, that it shows where in 332, before the Common Era, Alexander the Great was shown Daniel chapter 8 and several other chapters of different prophecies. They had to show him the importance of Torah, because we see that after he spent 3 days with them, made sacrifices, he gave them the right to honor Torah. He gave them the right not to have to pay tribute. He gave them the right to live in the land as long as they honored the Father's rules. And then after he conquered Darius the Mede, he had the Hebrew Scriptures translated into his native tongue, and that made it available for the first century so that they could show King Herod, when the magistrates came from Babylon and brought the gold, frankincense, and myrrh to Herod right before they gave him to Joseph and Miriam, because they had to escape to Egypt. And of course, some of that, I believe, was saved and stored for his burial, because literally part of the terminology was used. So we have more than enough opportunity to show that the ancient Hebrew scriptures have not been changed. They haven't been altered. They have been documented and copied successfully enough to be a standard that can be utilized. And then with the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Septuagint, we can compare some of our contemporary versions to show that the Old Testament is essentially very slightly changed, such as taking the Father's name Yahuwah out and changing it to the Lord. Instead of having Yahusha, they used Joshua. Okay, but nonetheless, at least it was closer. Now, just a couple minutes, baby. So, see, I lost my train of thought there. But in following the trail of Messiah, in following the Father's word, what was I speaking of? I was working towards a specific point.
Well, once you go ahead and take a break.
All right. So, in the Messiah being valid, in the word of the Old Testament being so slightly changed, and we can easily, with the Septuagint, go back and re-qualify. The New Testament, as we saw, does have alterations. We saw that there were some changes in Joel. It wasn't drastic, but it was drastic enough to where we can see that there was a change. We see that the names were changed. We see in the book of Acts that Peter, James, and John were beaten for using the true name of Messiah and the true name of the Father. They were expressly forbidden not to speak in that name. How can I find that name? Let's see if this works. New Testament. Push that button. Oh, sorry. Name. All right. book of Acts. We just jump to Acts because we know it's not going to be in the Gospels. All right, here we are. Here we are. Neither is there salvation, for there is no name under heaven wherewith anyone can be saved. Now you see, that's why it is so important to compare Joel, because Joel, it literally gave us the name to call upon. And so here, again, in Acts 4, it's the same dissertation. Ye men and brethren, these people aren't drunk as you have assumed, but they are filled with the Spirit. And so then they get together and they make certain determinations. All right, and then let's see. Then here in Acts chapter 5, it says, Did we not straightly command you that you should not teach in this name? And behold, you have filled Jerusalem with your doctrine and intend to bring this man's blood upon us. So we see they were using the real name for the Messiah, and clearly they were using the real name for the Father, because again, the Father's name at that time was only hidden by the oral law people and not the entire conglomerate of folk. So they were literally beaten in Acts chapter 5 because they were using the name. So we're seeing over and over, it is the name above all names. It is the name that we were to call upon throughout all our generations. That's what we were told in Exodus chapter 3. We see that it is the name that we are to call upon in Joel 2:28. The Messiah says that it is the Father that we are to go through to, because he has gone to the Father. The Father will fill us with his Spirit and do the things through us. So there is our reconciliation. In the next segment, if we can, or in one of the future segments, I wanted to go through. We touched on it slightly. The revival, I guess, that happened. I guess we did kind of cover it. During Nehemiah, and Ezra and John. I guess we did touch on some of it. All right. Well, for this segment, I guess this is not so bad. So if you have any quick questions for future things or any comments or statements, now I'm going to try and be quiet and let you say a few things. And while you're talking, I'm just going to take a second to go check to make sure my puppy's okay. I'm in the same room.
Okay. I'm thinking about the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Right. That's why I just went through that specific dissertation showing all the way through the Old Testament, the Father speaks specifically of the Messiah. All the way through the New Testament, we just saw that the Father and the Messiah speak to each other individually. And in John, we showed that the Father, if we keep his commandments, will come and make his abode with us. We see that both Messiah and the Father, if we keep their commandments, those two will come and make their abode with us. And during each of these conversations, the Holy Spirit was never mentioned, except in the phraseology in between. So therefore, the Father is thank you. John 4:24. Thank you very much. That's easier. We'll just read again the Messiah's words. John 4. Where did you go? Oh, I lost. I'm really not that fast with this. John 4:24. Well, you know the scripture. The Father is the Spirit. They that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. But let's, so that we're not taking it out of context. This is, I guess, is this the woman at the well? And the miracle of healing and all of that. Okay. Woman, believe me, the hour comes when you shall neither at this mountain or at Jerusalem worship the Father. This is in Samaria, you don't know what you worship. You don't know who you worship. Salvation is of the Hebrews, and they were the pagan remnant of that which was dispersed from the northern kingdom. But the hour comes, and now is, when the true worshipers shall worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father seeks such to worship him. For Yahuwah is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. So here we again see that the Messiah discusses the Father only, says that he's a spirit. We know that he's righteous. We know that he's holy because he says that all throughout the Old Testament, and then he proves it by doing good things and demanding us to be righteous and holy. So now, in the next segment, that's actually a good jumping off point. I have my notes, and I will go through because right here, right next to me, right here in this particular computer, I went through my notes on some of the early Nicene mandates and showing. Thank you. Let's go ahead and leap back to Daniel chapter 7 so that we know that we have the foundation of the prophecy itself. 7:25. Why do I do that? Daniel 7:25. This is part of a vision. It's coming through, and it's talking about the beasts, this, that, and the other, the different kingdoms, referring to. Wow. Okay, yeah. Next time, let's start out with Daniel chapter 2, and we'll then leapfrog into this because it discusses. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall arise after them. And he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. He shall speak great words against the Most High. He shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and will conspire to change times and laws. Times are things like the seasons, the feasts and festivals of the Father, and laws, the actual Torah, the importance of Torah, and they shall be given into his times for it says that, and then times are going to be divided.
We're talking about Revelation.
Well, it's talking about the future because a lot of focal points happen when the Messiah arrives. But what we see here is the kingdom that's coming is going to wear out the saints, destroy the city and the temple. It's going to change the law, and it's going to change the feasts and festivals. In other words, they're going to come in and change the holy days and get rid of the law. Now, the magic prayer of the Apostles' Creed and the magic prayer of the Baptists are, "Oh, Jesus, come into my heart and save me and take me to heaven when I die." None of that is anywhere in the scriptures, but it's the magic incantation that I was told to pray when I was 12. After that bony old fingered guy screamed at me and threatened me with hell forever. I didn't get saved. I just went and said a magic incantation that didn't mean anything. It was actually, but the next morning I started being a street preacher. I didn't get saved by the actual term until just before my birthday, several years later in 1975, because I was reading and I'd gotten through the Bible several times, and I was getting like my second or third time through. I'm in the New Testament. And then I was reading the letters of Saul that said, if you will believe in your heart and confess with your mouth that the Messiah was executed and the Father raised him from the dead, then you shall receive your salvation. And my brain opened wide, and I says, that's not what I did. I didn't believe that the Messiah existed. I didn't believe that the Messiah was brutally executed. I didn't believe that the Messiah had been risen by the power of the Father above. I was looking for
You were an atheist.
I was looking for a ladder out of hell because I was threatened by some psychopath with some ridiculous rhetoric. But the thing was, I'd already been reading the Bible because of my grandparents, and I'd already started validating the aspects of the scripture to where I started having faith in the fact that the message was good, but I just didn't understand it enough, and I was still trying to apply it to my life. So let me go ahead and write this down for the next session. Dan 2, 7,
25.
7:25, possibly chapter 10 and 11, because these are all prophecies. Many of them are, some are in, let's see, in 9, of course, we have the messianic prophecies. But anyway, and the other things, We have validity of Messiah, validity of the actual Hebrew scriptures. All right. And then prophecy. So we want to do 725 and the alteration of the first century writings. Well, thank you so very much. I don't mean to cut this short, but I do know you have things to do. I myself have things, and this is really better than I thought it would be because I was afraid that I was going to be making mistakes because I was frustrated. But it's so much easier when I have someone to talk to because that cuts me out. Then I'm not just trying to prove how smart I am and throw information out. I'm literally trying to sincerely answer someone's question.
Praise God.
So be blessed and be a blessing. Share my love, our love with everybody. And also,
I will.
during the time, keep writing down questions about things or scriptures that you'd like to cover as well. And whenever you don't have something, I'll just continue on the validity sessions. And then, because I'm always far more comfortable answering questions, that was how my research came to be. At first, it was my questions. But then when I started teaching the Bible and people started asking me questions, I made that my criteria. I always asked, I would write down their questions first. And then if I didn't have anything that I could offer right then, I would go study it during the week and then try and present what I found at the next study sessions. Well, again, thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening, a great day, and I will speak with you. Thanks. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right, we're going to end this session now. But just so that you know, in future sessions, I'm also going to be covering scientific aspects. I'm going to be covering archaeological, astronomical, historical, even as we've seen in here, the difference between doctrines and actual factual writings. So, thank you for coming along with us, and I will try to edit and put some of the scriptures up. I will try and make certain that I put pictures and things up in the future, because when we get into archaeology, there's a lot of archaeological aspects that show, just like when Joseph was given the ability to interpret dreams, the father used that to bring him to be second under King Dozier. And because of the 7 years where they had a lot of rain and they made a lot of crops, and during that time Joseph had a lot of canals dug so that they could take the water and have it further and further into the desert. Then when they built the big giant bins, I don't think it's Saqqara, but nonetheless I will be able to have that information for you. You're welcome to look up Ron Wyatt, because I was following some of his research because I was introduced to that by Michael Rood when I was in Israel. So anyway, he also was the one who found the different parts of the ark, and we did discuss some of the parts of the ark and the alloys and the wood and the places where it was found and things like that. But we'll get into details like that later on. Now, I really do appreciate you coming along. And when we get into these future sessions, I will try to have a little bit less dead air and a little more intelligence. You know who loves you? The Father above, the Messiah, and all of us.